Hi everyone, Armoured Pants here, and I have another video for you. This is the Tier 8 047 Phoenix Premium Tank, which has been in the shops recently, and therefore a few subs asked me if I could do a review on it, particularly as it's an unusual tank and not available very often. It has a credit coefficient of 175%, which is the fourth highest in Tier 8, so that's good for a premium tank. We're going to have a look at the tech spec now using blitzhanger.com, as we always do. Firstly, looking at how to sort out the provisions, then we look at the more technical details. So in terms of provisions, I'd run tin food, improved fuel and field rations in order to max out its view range and overall performance. With a medium tank, maxing out the view range is important. It has a 90mm gun, which is pretty standard for a Tier 8 medium tank, but you know, it lacks pen. So therefore, you know, if we look at the figures, we see 190mm or 200mm, depending on whether you use calibrated shells or gun rammer. 260 going up to 286 with heat, which is a Pramo, and HE is 45 going up to 50 if you run calibrated shells instead of gun rammer. Muzzle velocity is 1274 meters per second with AP. It's 1203 with heat, and it's 1268 meters per second. So all of the shells have a different muzzle velocity, so that kind of makes shell management a bit more complicated. Reload 6 seconds with gun rammer. It is 6.4 with calibrated shells. So therefore not a huge difference if you want to run calibrated shells. I would run supercharge, and I'd run vertical stabilizer because you are going to fire when you're moving because it's a medium tank. However, you may want to change that, and we'll discuss why when we look at the armor profile. The gun index on this is 12,000, so it's not so impressive, I have to say. The gun handling is not great, and you'll see some examples of that when we look at the gameplay. It's just adequate. It's not hugely bad, it's not good, it's just mediocre. Gun depression is 8 degrees. We should bear that in mind when we look at the armor profile, and 16 degrees of elevation, so therefore you have good gun alignment. Gun alignment is basically your ability to align your gun with the enemy, and this has good gun alignment. Its mobility or maneuverability index is 7.1. That's based on the formula we developed in one of the recent videos, so it's very low for a medium tank. Significantly lower, for example, than the M4A1, etc., which is not even especially a mobile medium tank at this tier. It does 58 kilometers per hour, which is great, and 20 kilometers in reverse. And you think, okay, so therefore surely it is maneuverable, but it's not, because its power to weight ratio sucks. It's really bad, and it also has just an average traverse. So not turret traverse, but the actual whole tank traverse is also pretty poor. The concealment numbers are okay, so if you're looking at spotting, they're decent. So if you take an RE251, which has a 304 meter view range, he needs to get within 210 meters of you to spot you up, or 223 meters if you're moving. So, you know, it's okay. He's going to still spot you, you know, 40 meters or so before you see him. But, you know, just be aware of that if there's an RE251 or another light tank in your team. But your concealment numbers are okay. Now, in terms of the armor profile, this tank has good armor profile. Why? Well, it has this unusual spaced armor at the sides. I mean, this tank is not a nation tank. This tank never exists. It's a fantasy tank, right? It's a hybrid tank. It looks like something you might see in Thunderbirds or one of those other Jerry Anderson shows from the 1970s and 80s, right? That is pretty cool looking, right? It's futuristic. And that's why it has this spaced armor, which you may not see on a standard normal medium tank at Tier 8 from Tech Tree. Obviously no armor at the back, but it has decent armor on the front. It has this spaced armor, so that's going to absorb heat, HE, and if you're up tiered, HESH from Tier 9 British tanks. And if you look at the turret is small. The gun mantlet basically makes up the whole thing. So the turret's almost impossible to pen. Normally big guns like a Rim Borsig or something would fire HE at you, but because you've got that spaced armor and the gun mantlet, even that's probably not going to do much damage, if any at all. So this tank therefore can go hull down, because that 8 degrees of gun depression and this tiny, almost impossible to pen turret means that it is really good at going hull down. And when you consider that, you may want to consider sniping, and that's why I said that perhaps if that's going to be your tactic in this tank, to fight from distance, and to use the good reload, and to use this turret and the gun depression, then perhaps using a refined gun rather than vertical stabilizer might be better. It depends on how you want to play this tank. We look here at the armor profile. You can see that even against tier 9s, it is formidable on the turret. And that spaced armor is a great advantage. In terms of that spaced armor, by the way, if you find yourself confronted with a Rim Borsig, an ISU 152 waffle tractor, something that's going to fire HE at you, you need to go against your instincts, which is to put your front of your tank facing them, your strongest armor, and turn to the side. Why? Because then you present them a very, very small target, and if they are unaware that this tank has significant spaced armor, they're going to fire that HE round at you, and it's going to do little or no damage because that spaced armor is going to absorb it. Worst case scenario, you're going to get a low roll, 100, 200 damage points. Best case scenario, you're not going to get any. So that's sort of an interesting tactic and tip for this tank, and of course it goes against our sort of normal reaction to, which is to put our front armor face on. So therefore I would suggest, you know, we just to keep that in mind when you're playing as a tactic with this tank, because of that significant spaced armor on both sides. In terms of tactics, I mean, you can play this as a medium tank, but you know, you're probably going to play as more as a supporting medium tank, because it has that poor power to weight ratio. While it has a great top speed, it doesn't accelerate very quickly. It's also not very maneuverable, so therefore if you in circle of death situations, this tank is difficult, because that power to weight ratio means it's tough for it to get around tanks. And if you're fighting something with a good traverse speed like a Tiger 2, like an IS-5, he will be actually able to keep his gun aligned with you when you're circling a death, and particularly if he's a good player and knows what he's doing. And you'll see an example of this in the game, the poor mobility. So any sort of heavy tank that is somewhat mobile, you are going to face a problem, so just bear that in mind. So maybe when you're getting used to this tank, maybe the best tactics are to fight from distance, to use that hold down capability, and then use supercharge and refined gun and calibrated shells to make sure you maximize your pen over distance. So let's have a look at some gameplay. It's going to be Himmelsdorf. Now in this game I kind of play this tank as a standard medium, so I go to capture base. You know, I mean, look, it is mobile, you know, that top speed, etc. But you know, it's not as mobile as many tier 8 mediums, and you will suffer a bit if you're really trying to rely on its mobility. So let's have a look at some gameplay. So as I said, I'm going to play as a standard medium tank, and I'm going to go to B, capture B. Now we see there's already a customer over at A, so then what I'm going to do is go over there, and I'm going to see if I can support my team and taking out the standard B. Now you'll see here, this is the best place you want to be in a medium tank. Any medium tank, but especially this one due to its mobility, is behind your target, right? No risk of being hit, and you can drop the adrenaline and just put as many shells as you can into that target and help your team to clear them off, right? So that's sort of your ideal tactic, your ideal position in any medium tank, but especially this one. Now look at this here. Let's do a replay on this. This is this poor gun handling that we spoke about, this low gun index. See, look at this. Now I'm aiming at the bottom lower plate, and look where it hits, right off. I mean, it's the dispersion there is just awful. And you know, when you're in a medium tank and you're firing, and I'm running vertical stabilizer in this game, when you're firing at such a short distance, you expect to pen, you don't expect to deviate, which is basically what dispersion is. It's your maximum deviation from a target. You don't expect to deviate quite so much, even when you're moving, right? So the gun handling is not great. There are many medium tanks that have significantly better gun handling, so that is also, I would say, a weakness in this tank. So just be aware of that when you are when you're playing it. So I know I'm being a bit negative about this tank in terms of its maneuverability and its gun handling. It's not great, but you know, it is a very unusual tank. It's very rare. It's one of the rarest tanks in Blitz, and therefore if you are a you know, a Blitz aficionado, if you're serious about your blitzing, then definitely I would recommend to get it, because it's a great tank to have in your garage. It looks so different, it's so unusual, and it's definitely a collector's tank. Right? It's something for the Blitz purists among you, and therefore, just for this reason, I would recommend having it in your garage. Make a bit of a mess out of that there, a bit of sloppy play. Shouldn't have popped out, I should have reversed out and let one of them come after me, which is what I'm doing now. But you'd see here when I tried to pull back the maneuverability, if I was in a more mobile medium tank, I wouldn't have probably got hit there. And you can see here when I'm trying to get around the glacier, you see exactly what I mean here about that lack of mobility. And you can come a cropper because of that, so just be aware that you need to be very conscious of it. And unless you're you know, coming in against something like a Luva or KV4, KV5, something which is really cumbersome, or of course a turretless TD, and you need to be very careful in this tank when you're trying to circle death, because that lack of power to weight ratio means that accelerating is difficult. By the way, one key thing, if you didn't pick up on it when we were looking at the tech spec, is it also has its worst power to weight ratio performance on hard terrain, which is very unusual because most tanks have their best power to weight ratio performance on hard terrain and their worst power to weight ratio performance on soft terrain. This tank is the opposite of that, so it's also counterintuitive. So if you take that along with putting the side of your tank to face big HE guns, there's a couple of counterintuitive aspects of this tank which go against our normal sort of learned and expected behavior in Blitz. So just be aware of that as well, guys. In case you're wondering what I'm doing here, this is just game management. I'm trying to see if I can get one. I'm one shot for the T54 lightweight, he's one shot for me, so I'm just trying to see if I can wait until we have a clear point advantage, and even if he takes me out, then we're still going to win the game. But as you see, we run out of time just as I was coming in for that last kill shot. But overall, a good game in this tank. First class mastery, almost 2.8k damage. You can see here the 175% credit coefficient in action, over 72,000 credits earned. So you know, we can see that this tank is good in terms of its performance as a premium tank, because we want premium tanks not just for their collectability and their unusual appearance and the fact they're not in tech tree, but also we want them effectively to make credits for us, and you can see that this tank is pretty good at that. As I said, it's the fourth best in its tier. So overall, a good illustration of this tank's strengths, but also its limitations. So let's have a quick recap on this tank and the key things that we discussed already. You know, it's an unusual premium tank and has a good credit coefficient, fourth in its tier, so that's not bad at all. And I think, you know, as we said before, it's adequate at being a medium tank. There's nothing special about it. It's not awful for sure, but there's nothing special about it either. But it's great to have in your garage because it just is unusual, very rare, and it's one for collectors, it's one for the Blitz purists. The spaced armor on the sides is a particular bonus because it absorbs heat, HE and HESH if you're up tiered. But please note that power to weight ratio on traverse. It has a distinct lack of mobility for a tier 8 medium, and you can come a cropper because of that. But it has the gun depression and the turret, so it is an effective hold down sniper. Maybe that's a good way to start playing this tank while you get used to it. And if you do, then you may want to use refined gun rather than vertical stabilizer, which you would normally use on a medium tank. I would also use supercharge regardless of whether or not you're going to snipe or whether or not you are going to play it more aggressively as a medium tank. Calibrated shells may be a better option than using gun rammer because of the weak pen and the smaller 90mm gun. It struggles in Circle of Death. You know, take my word for it, and you saw a little bit in the gameplay, so just be aware of that. It's not a need to have tank, but it is definitely a nice to have tank, and that would be my overall summary for you guys. It's good to have in the garage for those Blitz purists. So cheers Mush, thanks for watching. I hope you found this useful, I hope you found it enjoyable, and I guess now all that remains for me to say is pants off.